It was an early morning in a quiet countryside town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by face, if not by name. The air was cool and the streets were still empty except for the faint sound of birds chirping in the trees. Inside a small roadside garage, a man named Tom wiped the grease from his hands and prepared for another day of work. His life was simple. He fixed cars, helped neighbors, and never asked for more than what he needed. He wasn't rich, but he was proud of his honesty and his skill with engines. The garage was old and small, with faded paint and a creaky sign that read Tom's Auto Service. It wasn't much to look at, but people trusted him. He had a small radio on the workbench that played soft music as he worked. Every now and then he would pause, sip his tea, and look out at the empty road that stretched beyond the garage. Life moved slowly there, but Tom didn't mind. He liked the peace. That morning he was working on an old pickup truck that belonged to a farmer down the road. He was tightening a few bolts when he heard a strange sound, the growl of a car engine struggling to stay alive. Looking up, he saw a sleek black car coming down the road, smoke pouring from under its hood. It was the kind of car that didn't belong in that small town. The car swerved slightly before stopping just a few feet from the garage. Tom dropped his tools and hurried over. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out in a crisp suit, clearly frustrated. His shoes were polished, his watch expensive, and his phone glued to his ear as he muttered something under his breath. "Engine trouble?" Tom asked, wiping his hands on a rag. The man looked up, clearly surprised by how quickly Tom had appeared. "Yeah, I think something's wrong. It started overheating out of nowhere," he said, glancing nervously at his watch. "I'm supposed to be in the city in less than an hour." Tom opened the hood and a cloud of steam hissed out. He leaned in carefully, examining the engine. "Looks like your fuel line's leaking," he said calmly. "If you kept driving like this, the whole thing could have caught fire." The man's eyes widened slightly. "You're kidding." Tom shook his head. "No, sir. You're lucky it happened here and not on the highway." The man sighed. "Can you fix it quickly? I really can't afford to be late." Tom nodded and got to work immediately. He didn't ask questions about who the man was or why he was in such a hurry. That wasn't his way. He just focused on the job, his hands moving quickly and confidently. The man stood nearby, checking his phone and pacing back and forth. "You always work alone?" he asked after a while, glancing around the small garage. "Most of the time," Tom said without looking up. "My brother helps me sometimes when he's not busy, but it's usually just me." The man nodded absently. "You must get a lot of work here." "Enough to keep me busy," Tom replied with a small smile. After about 30 minutes, Tom tightened the last clamp and stepped back. "All done. You should be fine now, but I'd get that line replaced soon. It's old." The man looked surprised. "That was fast. How much do I owe you?" Tom shook his head. "Just 50. It wasn't a big job." The man raised an eyebrow. "50, that's it? You just saved my car." Tom smiled faintly. "You needed help. I don't overcharge people for that." The man chuckled quietly and handed him the cash. "Well, you just saved me a lot more than 50, I can tell you that." He reached out a hand. "Thanks, Tom," he said, shaking his hand. "Right, thanks, Tom. You really helped me out." Tom nodded. "Drive safe." The man climbed back into his car and sped off down the road, the engine purring smoothly now. Tom watched until the car disappeared into the distance. Then he returned to his work, not thinking twice about what had just happened. To him, it was just another repair, another day. A few hours later, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Tom sat outside the garage eating his lunch, a simple sandwich and a bottle of water. The road was quiet again, except for the occasional passing truck. He thought about the man in the suit for a moment. There was something about him, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. He seemed like someone important, though Tom didn't care much about titles or wealth. Everyone's car broke down the same way. That evening, when Tom closed up the shop, he noticed a small silver pen lying near the spot where the man had parked. It was heavy and engraved with fine details. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. It looked expensive, definitely not something from around here. He placed it on a shelf inside the office, thinking he'd return it if the man ever came back. Days passed and Tom forgot about it. He continued his usual routine, fixing cars, helping locals, and chatting with his old customers who often stopped by just to talk. His work wasn't glamorous, but he loved it. There was something honest about repairing things, about making something broken work again. One rainy afternoon, as Tom was replacing a tire, a local delivery driver came by with a newspaper. "You hear about that big accident on the highway last week?" the driver asked. Tom shook his head. "No, what happened?" The driver leaned against the doorway. "Some rich businessman's car almost exploded. They said it was a fuel leak, but it got fixed just in time. Lucky guy. Apparently the car would have caught fire if he'd driven another mile." Tom froze for a moment, the wrench still in his hand. "What kind of car?" he asked. "A black one. Fancy model, can't remember the name. They said the driver was some millionaire from the city. Big name." Tom's mind flashed back to the man in the suit, the smoke rising from that same black car. He didn't say anything to the driver, just nodded quietly. After the man left, Tom sat down on the stool by his workbench, staring at the floor. He hadn't realized until that moment that his quick repair might have saved the man's life. He smiled faintly to himself. It felt strange. He didn't know the man's name, but the thought that he'd helped someone, even unknowingly, gave him a quiet sense of peace. He didn't tell anyone about it. He wasn't the kind to brag or seek praise. He simply cleaned his tools, turned off the lights, and locked up for the night. As he walked home under the fading light, he thought about how life worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes you do something small, something you don't think twice about, and it ends up meaning everything to someone else. That night, Tom sat by the window in his modest home, listening to the rain tapping on the glass. His wife poured him a cup of tea and asked about his day. He smiled, saying it was just like any other. A few cars, a bit of grease, and some quiet moments in between. He didn't mention the news he'd heard or the man he'd helped. Some things he thought were better kept as quiet blessings. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the roads clean. The silver pen still sat on the shelf in his garage, catching a small glint of light from the window. It waited there, a silent reminder of the moment Tom had unknowingly changed a stranger's fate, and of the visit that was yet to come. A week passed since the day Tom fixed the stranger's car. The memory had quietly faded into the rhythm of his everyday life. His days looked the same, the sound of engines starting, the smell of oil and rubber, and the chatter of familiar customers who trusted him more like a friend than a mechanic. But that morning felt different somehow. The radio on his workbench was buzzing with news, and the announcer's serious tone caught Tom's attention. Reports confirmed that a car belonging to businessman Edward Crane was involved in a near-fatal accident last week, the voice said. Sources claim that quick repairs made earlier that day may have prevented a deadly explosion. Mr. Crane was unharmed. Tom froze for a moment. He stood still, wiping his hands slowly on a rag. The name meant nothing to him, Edward Crane, but the story did. The black car, the fuel leak, the rushed man in a suit, it had to be the same person. He turned off the radio and leaned on the counter, thinking quietly. He didn't know whether to feel shocked or relieved. The man had nearly lost his life that same day, yet somehow everything turned out fine. Later that day, a regular customer dropped by, an elderly man named Peter, who often brought his old tractor for servicing. "Did you hear about that millionaire on the news?" Peter said as he walked in. "Imagine being that lucky. Guess someone up there likes him." Tom smiled faintly. "Yeah, I heard," he said, trying to sound casual. Peter chuckled. "If I had that kind of luck, I'd buy this whole town." He laughed at his own joke before stepping out again. Tom went back to work, but his mind wasn't focused. He kept thinking about how strange life could be. He had fixed that car like it was any other. He didn't know the man's name, didn't ask what he did, didn't even think about what could have happened if he hadn't stopped to help. It made him think about all the small things people do every day without realizing their weight. By evening, Tom was cleaning the garage when his eyes fell on the silver pen still sitting on the shelf. The light from the setting sun made it shimmer slightly. He picked it up again, running his fingers over the smooth metal. There were tiny initials engraved near the clip. "EC," he smiled softly. "Edward Crane," he murmured to himself. He set it back on the shelf and locked the garage for the night. The next few days rolled by quietly. The town carried on with its slow, steady rhythm. Tom didn't talk to anyone about what had happened. He wasn't the kind to make a story out of good deeds. Deep inside, he felt content just knowing that the man had survived. That was enough for him. One afternoon, as Tom was fixing a delivery van, a couple of customers gathered by the doorway talking about the same name again. "That Crane fellow's all over the news," one of them said. "They're saying he's some big deal in the city. Owns half the construction projects there. Apparently he disappeared for a week after that crash." Tom listened quietly but didn't join the conversation. He was never much for gossip. The sun dipped lower, painting the garage in a soft orange glow. As Tom packed up his tools, he noticed a small envelope that must have been slipped under the door. There was no name, just his address written neatly on the front. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper with only a few lines. "To the mechanic who saved a life, thank you. You may not know what you've done, but I will never forget it." There was no signature, just those words. Tom stared at the note for a long time, unsure what to think. Maybe it was from the man. Maybe not. Either way, the message warmed his heart. He tucked the note into a drawer inside the office and went home with a quiet smile. At home, the smell of freshly cooked dinner filled the air. His wife greeted him with her usual gentle smile. They talked about simple things, groceries, the weather, the neighbor's new dog. She noticed he was quiet that evening and asked if something was on his mind. He hesitated before saying, "You ever think about how a small thing can change someone's whole life?" She looked up from the table, thoughtful. "I think that happens more often than we realize," she said softly. Tom nodded, saying nothing more. But the thought stayed with him long after they went to bed. He couldn't help but wonder if the man in the suit ever thought about the mechanic who fixed his car on a quiet country road. The next morning started as usual, but the town seemed busier than normal. A few locals stood around the main street talking excitedly. Tom didn't pay much attention. He had work to do, a few cars waiting and an engine rebuild that needed his focus. The world outside his garage could spin however it wanted. He was content in his little corner of it. Around midday, while he was deep in work, a young boy from the nearby store ran up to him, breathless. "Tom, you won't believe it. Some big city reporters are in town. They're asking about a mechanic who fixed a rich man's car. Is that you?" Tom paused, looking up from under the car. "Reporters?" The boy nodded eagerly. "Yeah. They said the man's name is Edward Crane. He told them someone saved his life and they're trying to find out who it was." Tom chuckled and shook his head. "Well, tell them it wasn't me," he said kindly. "I just fix cars." The boy laughed and ran off. But deep down, Tom knew it was him. And honestly, that was enough. He didn't need attention or cameras showing up at his shop. What he did was just part of being human, helping someone when they needed it. That night, Tom was sitting on his porch enjoying the quiet after a long day. The stars were out and the sky was clear. He thought again about the man and wondered where he was now. Probably back in the city, back to his big office and busy life. Maybe he had already forgotten about the small-town mechanic who had stopped to help. And even if he had, that didn't matter. Tom was glad the man was alive. Days turned into weeks. The garage stayed busy and life went on. The silver pen still sat untouched on the shelf, almost like it was waiting. Tom would sometimes glance at it and think, maybe one day he'll come back for it. But no one did. Then one rainy morning, something unusual happened. As Tom was unlocking the garage, a car horn sounded outside. A black car, not the same one as before but just as expensive, stopped by the gate. Two men in dark suits stepped out, holding umbrellas. They looked out of place in that quiet town. Tom frowned slightly, unsure what was going on. One of the men walked up and asked, "Are you Mr. Tom?" "Yes," he replied slowly. The man nodded. "We have a message for you. Mr. Edward Crane would like to meet you." Tom blinked, caught off guard.
"Meet me? For what?"
The man smiled politely. He said it's personal. Tom didn't know what to say. He stood there in the rain, his heart beating a little faster. The world suddenly felt much bigger than it had a few minutes ago. He finally nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell him I'll be here." The man handed him a small card before returning to the car. It had a name, an address, and a phone number printed neatly on it. As the black car drove away, Tom looked down at the card, the raindrops sliding off its glossy surface. The address wasn't far, just outside the city. He slipped it into his pocket and went inside, still not fully believing what had just happened. He didn't know what this meeting would bring, or why the man wanted to see him after all this time. But deep inside, he had a feeling that whatever was coming next would change everything. And so, The ordinary mechanic who once fixed a stranger's car on a quiet morning unknowingly stepped closer to a moment that would stay with him forever, a visit he would never forget. Tom couldn't sleep that night. The thought of meeting the man whose life he had unknowingly saved kept him awake long after his wife had drifted off. He kept turning the card over in his hands, reading the name and the address again and again. Edward Crane. It sounded so distant, so far removed from his quiet little life, yet somehow, this man wanted to see him. The next morning, Tom woke early, not needing an alarm. He dressed in his usual work clothes, a simple shirt and worn jeans, and grabbed his keys. His wife, noticing his quiet tension, asked, "Are you sure about this?" "I don't know what's going to happen," Tom admitted, "but I think I need to go." She smiled gently, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Just be yourself. That's enough." The drive to the city was longer than he expected. The roads were crowded, the traffic heavy, and the buildings tall and unfamiliar. Tom kept his eyes on the road, trying not to feel overwhelmed. He had spent his whole life in a small town, and now he was driving into a world so different it almost felt like stepping into a dream. Finally, he arrived at the address on the card. A large mansion loomed before him, surrounded by high gates and perfectly trimmed gardens. A few security guards watched as he pulled up, eyeing him curiously. Tom felt slightly out of place, but he reminded himself that he was just a man going to meet another man, nothing more. One of the guards approached him and asked for the card. Tom handed it over quietly. The guard examined it, nodded, and then pressed a button on a nearby intercom. "Mr. Crane will see you now," he said. Tom swallowed hard and nodded. He followed the guard down a long driveway and into the grand entrance hall. The marble floors gleamed. Chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the smell of fresh flowers filled the air. Tom had never been in a place like this before. It felt surreal, almost unreal. A door opened at the far end of the hall, and a man stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with a quiet confidence. Tom recognized him immediately from the photos he had seen in newspapers. Edward Crane. "Tom," Edward said, extending his hand. His voice was calm, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Thank you for coming." Tom shook his hand firmly, feeling the weight of the moment. "I wasn't expecting this," he said quietly. Edward smiled. "I imagine not. Please come in." They walked into a spacious sitting room, decorated with tasteful furniture and expensive artwork. Tom felt a little nervous, unsure where to look or how to act. He had never been in a place like this, and every detail made him feel small, almost ordinary. Edward gestured for him to sit. "I wanted to meet you in person because I don't think I can ever fully thank you over the phone or through a letter. What you did in fixing my car that day may have saved my life. You might not even realize it." Tom shifted in his seat, unsure what to say. I just did what anyone would do," he said honestly. "I saw a car in trouble and I fixed it." "That's it," Edward shook his head. "No, it's more than that. That's exactly the point. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't expect anything in return. You acted out of kindness and skill, and that's rare. Very rare." Tom felt a flush of embarrassment. He wasn't used to being praised, especially by someone like Edward Crane. "I really didn't do it for that," he muttered. "I was just doing my job." "I know," Edward said, leaning back in his chair. "That's what makes it remarkable. Most people would have looked the other way, said it wasn't their problem. But you helped. You stayed calm, worked quickly, and made sure I was safe." Tom nodded slowly, taking in the words. It was strange to hear someone talk about him like that. In his world, fixing cars was normal. Saving a life, well, that was something else entirely. Edward leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious. "Tom, I've been thinking a lot about that day. It could have ended very differently. I wouldn't be here talking to you if it weren't for your help. And I don't want you to feel like this is just about me. It's about recognizing the impact of one small act." Tom stayed quiet, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. He had never imagined that one simple act could carry such weight. After a moment, Edward stood and walked over to a small shelf. He picked up the silver pen that Tom had seen in his garage and held it out. "I found this," he said, his voice soft. "I believe it belongs to you." Tom looked at the pen, stunned. "You brought it all the way here?" Edward smiled gently. "Yes, it's the least I could do. It's a small token, but it reminds me of that moment, and of the man who made it possible for me to continue my life." Tom reached out and took the pen, running his fingers over the smooth metal. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Don't say anything, Edward replied. Just know that what you did matters. You saved more than my car that day. You saved my life. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Tom felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of attention or gratitude, but it was genuine. He realized that his small act, something he thought was ordinary, had carried meaning far beyond his understanding. Edward gestured for Tom to sit again. I wanted to meet you not just to thank you, but to get to know you. You're the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone honest, skilled, and willing to help without expecting anything in return. Tom chuckled quietly, feeling awkward under such praise. I'm just a mechanic, he said. Edward shook his head. You're more than that. You have a gift for helping people, and you did it when it mattered most. That's something special, Tom. Don't ever forget that. They talked for hours. Edward shared stories about his work, the responsibilities he carried, and the challenges he faced running his business. Tom listened quietly, asking a few questions but mostly absorbing the words. He felt out of place at times, but Edward made him comfortable, speaking with sincerity rather than authority. By the time the sun began to set, Tom realized that he had been sitting there for hours. Edward stood and offered his hand again. Thank you, Tom. Truly. I hope one day I can repay you in some meaningful way. Tom shook his hand, smiling softly. You don't owe me anything, he said. I'm just glad you're safe. Edward nodded, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. I insist, he said. Your act of kindness deserves recognition, and I want to make sure it matters in a way you'll see. Tom left the mansion that evening, walking to his car in a daze. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, and the air was filled with the hum of distant traffic. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The man he had unknowingly saved, the gratitude, the sincerity. It was all overwhelming. As he drove back toward his small town, he realized something important. Life had a way of surprising you, even when you think your actions are small or insignificant. One moment he was just a mechanic fixing a car. The next he was a man who had saved a life, someone whose skills and heart had made a real difference. When he finally reached home, his wife was waiting on the porch, a warm light spilling from the kitchen behind her. She looked at him, reading the mixture of exhaustion and amazement on his face. Well? She asked softly. Tom sat down, still holding the silver pen in his hand. It was incredible, he said. He's grateful. He remembers. Everything I did mattered more than I realized. She smiled and reached for his hand. I told you, she said. Kindness never goes unnoticed. That night, Tom placed the pen carefully on his bedside table. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt something shift inside him. The ordinary mechanic from a small town had stepped into a world so different, so unfamiliar, and yet he felt connected in a way he had never imagined. And he understood, more than ever, that sometimes the smallest act, done without expectation, could ripple outward in ways that changed everything, not just for someone else, but for you as well. The quiet of his home seemed different that night. It wasn't just peace. It was a sense of possibility, of hope. Tom lay down, still thinking about the meeting, about the man, and about the unexpected journey his life had just begun to take. The days after his meeting with Edward Crane felt unreal to Tom. He went to work as usual, waking up early, checking engines, and greeting his regular customers. Yet something had shifted inside him. The memory of the mansion, the quiet confidence in Edward's eyes, and the sincere gratitude he had received stayed with him, like a warm light he couldn't ignore. He kept glancing at the silver pen on his workbench, feeling that it was more than just a gift. It was a reminder of a moment that had changed his life forever. One morning, as Tom was adjusting a tire on a delivery van, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. Hello, Tom? A voice asked politely. Yes, he replied. This is Edward Crane, the voice continued. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to talk about something important. I would like to meet you again, if you're willing. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. Yes, I can come, he said quietly. Wonderful, Edward said warmly. There's no rush, but I'd like to show you something. You've earned it. Tom hung up and set the phone down slowly. His mind was racing. He didn't know what Edward meant by show you something, but the words felt heavy with promise. He shared the news with his wife, who smiled and squeezed his hand. "See, I told you this would go somewhere." "Just go and be yourself," she said. The drive to the city was familiar now, but it didn't feel less extraordinary. Tom kept thinking about how this stranger-turned-grateful millionaire had invited him back. Not for appearances, but because he truly wanted to recognize him. It was humbling, and he felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. When he arrived, the guards recognized him immediately and allowed him inside without question. Edward met him in the entrance hall, smiling as if they were old friends. "Tom," he said, shaking his hand, "thank you for coming so quickly. I wanted to show you something I think you'll find interesting." He led Tom into a private study, walls lined with books and photos of construction projects, but also of moments with employees and charity events. On a large table in the center, there were blueprints, photographs of a small garage, and documents showing business plans. Tom looked around, confused. "What is all this?" Edward gestured toward the blueprints. "This is your garage, well, what it could become. I've been thinking about how your skill and honesty could reach more people. I want to invest in your business, Tom. Not just as a gift, but as a way to help you grow it into something bigger." Tom blinked, unsure he heard correctly. "Invest in my garage?" Edward nodded. "Yes, I know it's a lot to take in, but I want to help you expand, hire a few skilled mechanics, and modernize your shop. Your talent shouldn't be limited by the size of your garage or the tools you currently have." Tom shook his head slowly. I don't know what to say. I've never run a big shop. I'm not used to things like this." "That's okay," Edward said kindly. "That's why I'm here. I want to make sure you have the resources and guidance to make it happen. You earned this, Tom. You didn't do it for recognition or money, but you deserve it. Your work matters." Tom felt a lump in his throat. He had spent his life fixing cars, helping neighbors, and quietly doing his job without ever expecting anything back. Now the world was offering him a chance to take that dedication to a whole new level. Edward smiled, noticing the hesitation in Tom's eyes. "It's not just about money. I want to give you an opportunity. You've shown that your heart and hands are capable of more than you know. I want to help you see that for yourself." Tom took a deep breath, trying to process the weight of it all. He thought about his small town, the familiar faces, the quiet life he had built. Could he step into a bigger world? Could he take this chance without losing himself? Edward seemed to read his thoughts. "I know it's a lot. I'm not asking for an answer today. Take some time to think about it. But know that this isn't just about growing a business. It's about giving your work the recognition it deserves and creating something that can last for years." They spent the next few hours going over plans, discussing possible renovations, hiring skilled workers, and how the new garage could serve more people. Tom asked questions, taking careful notes. Edward didn't rush him. He wanted Tom to feel confident, not pressured. By late afternoon, Tom felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had never imagined his life could change this way. He thought of his family, his wife's encouragement, and the loyal customers who trusted him. Could he manage all of this? Could he step into a world so different from the quiet streets of his town? Edward saw the doubt in his eyes. "You're capable, Tom," he said firmly. "You just need to trust yourself. You've already proven that you can handle pressure, think clearly, and act decisively. Those are qualities not everyone has. With the right tools and support, you can do amazing things." Tom nodded, slowly starting to believe him. He realized that this wasn't about wealth or prestige. It was about taking the skills and values he had always relied on, honesty, dedication, and care, and giving them room to grow. When it was time to leave, Edward shook his hand again. "Think about it, Tom. There's no rush. But I hope you'll take this opportunity. I want to see you succeed, not just for me, but for yourself and the people you help every day." On the drive home, Tom felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. His mind raced with possibilities: a bigger garage, more customers, the chance to mentor others, and the idea of making a real difference beyond his small town. He had never thought about what his life could become, and now he was faced with a choice that could change everything. When he arrived home, his wife was waiting with a cup of tea. He told her everything: the investment, the plans, and Edward's encouragement. She listened quietly, nodding, her eyes shining with pride. "Tom," she said gently, "this is your chance. You've always done good work, and now the world is giving you the tools to do even more. You can take it step by step. You don't have to do everything at once." He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. I think I want to do it," he admitted. "I want to see where this can go." The next weeks were a whirlwind. Tom worked long hours, coordinating with Edward's team, selecting tools and planning renovations. The garage began to take shape in his mind. Bigger bays, more equipment, and a team of mechanics who shared his values. Each day he felt more confident, more capable, and more inspired. One afternoon, as he inspected new equipment arriving for the garage, he thought back to that morning when he had fixed Edward Crane's car. At the time, he had no idea how that small act would lead to this moment. It amazed him how life could unfold in ways that were completely unexpected. Edward called him one evening just to check in. "How's everything going?" he asked. Tom smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "It's going well. I'm starting to see it all come together. And I'm learning more than I ever thought I could." Edward chuckled. "Good. Just remember, this is your journey. I'm just here to help make it possible. You've earned every step of it." As Tom hung up the phone, he looked around his small town, the familiar streets and the little garage he had started with. He realized that even though the world was changing around him, his heart hadn't. He was still the same man, honest, hardworking, and dedicated to helping others. But now he had the chance to reach farther than he ever imagined. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the town. Tom sat on the steps of his garage, holding the silver pen Edward had given him. He thought about the strange twist of fate, how a simple act of fixing a car on a quiet morning had led to this. He smiled, feeling a quiet sense of purpose and excitement. Life had given him an unexpected gift, and he was ready to embrace it. For Tom, this was more than just an investment or a bigger garage. It was a chance to prove to himself that his work mattered, that his honesty and skill could make a real difference, and that sometimes the smallest actions could lead to the biggest changes. And so, the mechanic who had once only dreamed of a quiet life in a small town now stood at the threshold of something far greater. A new chapter that would transform not just his garage, but his future, and perhaps even the lives of everyone he touched along the way. The following morning, Tom woke up earlier than usual, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The small town outside his window was quiet, the sun just beginning to rise and paint the streets in soft golden light. Today felt different. It wasn't just another day of work or repairing cars. It was a day that promised change, the kind that came slowly but could alter the course of one's life forever. Tom made his way to the garage, the familiar sound of his footsteps echoing lightly on the concrete floor. He glanced around at the walls, the tools, and the small bays where he had spent countless hours, thinking about how much it all had grown in his mind over the past weeks. The renovations were almost complete. The old garage was transforming into something modern, bright, and inviting. Bigger bays had been added, new equipment lined the walls, and he had already hired a couple of skilled mechanics who shared his values of honesty, dedication, and hard work. He walked past the new service bays, checking each one carefully. Everything seemed ready. As he examined the tools laid out on a clean workbench, a car horn outside made him look up. A sleek black limousine was pulling into the lot, gleaming in the early sunlight. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling about who it could be. The car stopped near the entrance, and two well-dressed men stepped out carrying umbrellas. They looked at him politely and then approached. One of them spoke first, his tone calm and professional. "Mr. Tom, Mr. Edward Crane would like to see you." Tom's breath caught. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth and walking toward the car. He wasn't nervous in the way people feel before an interview or a performance. This was something different. This was a man whose life he had saved, a man who had changed his own life with a simple act of recognition and trust. Edward stepped out of the car, smiling warmly. His presence was calm yet commanding, and Tom felt the familiar mix of awe and comfort he had experienced during their first meeting. Edward extended his hand. "Tom, it's good to see you again," he said. "Good to see you too," Tom replied, shaking his hand firmly. Edward gestured toward the new garage. "I wanted to see the results for myself. I've heard from my team that things are going well, but I wanted to see the transformation in person." Tom felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. It's been a lot of work, but it's coming together, he said quietly, his voice filled with satisfaction. I've hired good people and we're ready to take on more work. Everything you helped set in motion has made this possible. Edward nodded, his eyes scanning the space. It's impressive. I can see the care and thought that went into it. You didn't just build a garage. You created a place where people can trust that their vehicles are in safe hands. That's rare these days, Tom smiled faintly. I've always believed in doing things right, even if it takes more time or effort. I guess it just carried over to this new space. Edward's eyes softened. It shows. And more than that, it shows the kind of person you are. Honest, hardworking, and willing to take responsibility. Those qualities are what made me trust you in the first place, even when we had never met. Tom looked down at his hands, feeling slightly embarrassed by the praise. He wasn't used to it. He had spent his life working quietly, doing what needed to be done without expecting recognition. Yet here he was, being acknowledged in a way that felt deeply personal and meaningful. They walked through the garage together, Edward asking questions about the renovations, the equipment, and the staff. Tom answered patiently, showing the changes he had made and the systems he had put in place. Edward listened carefully, offering suggestions here and there, but mostly observing. It was clear he wanted Tom to feel ownership of everything. This wasn't a demonstration of control, but a celebration of what Tom had achieved. After the tour, they sat in a small office at the back of the garage. Tom poured 2 cups of coffee, and they settled into the chairs across from each other. Edward leaned back, looking thoughtful. Tom, do you realize what you've done here? Not just with the garage, but with yourself. Tom shook his head slowly. I'm not sure I understand, he said. Edward smiled. You took an opportunity and turned it into something meaningful. You could have just accepted the investment and done the minimum, but you didn't. You applied the same care, dedication, and integrity that saved my life to this project. That's extraordinary. It's rare for someone to take responsibility so fully and make something grow from it. Tom felt a warmth spread through him. He had never thought of himself as extraordinary. He had just done what he felt was right. Yet hearing it from Edward, someone whose life he had unknowingly saved, made the words carry weight. Edward paused, then continued. And there's another reason I'm here today. I want to show my appreciation in a way that goes beyond words. I want to make sure that your work continues to have an impact, not just here in this town, but everywhere you touch. Tom looked at him, curious and slightly cautious. What do you mean? Edward reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folder. Inside were plans, documents, and letters of support for partnerships, training programs, and community outreach initiatives. I want to help you expand further, Edward explained. You've already created a remarkable space here, but I believe your philosophy and skill could benefit many more people. This isn't just about business growth. It's about creating something lasting, something that reflects your values. Tom's eyes widened. The idea was overwhelming but also thrilling. He had never imagined his work having such reach, nor did he know how to handle it. Yet the thought of making a difference on a larger scale filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. Edward smiled, seeing the mixture of excitement and apprehension on Tom's face. I know it's a lot to take in, and you don't have to decide everything today, but I wanted you to see what's possible. This is your vision, Tom, and I want to help make it real. Tom sat back, taking it all in. He thought about the early mornings at his old garage, the simple repairs, the customers who trusted him, and the small town that had shaped him. And now all of that seemed connected to something larger. A life-changing path that had begun with one small act, fixing a car for a man he didn't even know. He looked at Edward and said softly, I never imagined that helping someone like you could lead to all of this. I don't know what to say. Edward's eyes were kind. Then just say you'll consider it. Take the time you need. But remember, Tom, the actions we take, even small ones, can ripple outward in ways we never anticipate. You proved that when you saved my life. Now you have a chance to continue that ripple in your own way. Tom nodded, feeling the weight of the words. It was a lot to take in, but he knew they were true. Life had a way of surprising him, of showing that even the simplest acts could carry unimaginable consequences. And now he had a chance to carry those lessons forward, to build something meaningful not just for himself but for everyone who trusted him. The visit ended with Edward standing and offering his hand once more. I'm proud of you, Tom. Not just for what you've built, but for who you are. Never forget that. Tom shook his hand firmly, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. Thank you. I won't forget. As Edward left, Tom watched the limousine disappear down the road, the sun reflecting off its polished surface. He turned back to the garage, the space filled with light and promise. For the first time, he truly saw it, not just as a building or a business, but as a symbol of growth, perseverance, and integrity. Over the following months, Tom's garage flourished. The new team worked efficiently. The upgraded equipment allowed for more complex repairs, and the reputation of the shop grew far beyond the town. People traveled from neighboring areas just to have their vehicles serviced by the honest, skilled mechanics who ran a garage founded on care and integrity. But more than the success, what Tom cherished was the sense of purpose. Every day he remembered that small act of kindness, the morning he fixed a car without expecting anything in return, and how it had led to this, a life full of opportunity, gratitude, and meaningful work. He kept the silver pen on his desk, a quiet reminder of the day his ordinary actions became extraordinary. Visitors to the garage often asked about it, and he would simply smile, sharing the story in the simplest terms, that sometimes the smallest acts can change lives in ways we never expect. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Tom sat on the steps of his garage watching his team work. He thought about how far things had come, how life could take a quiet, ordinary person and place them in moments of great consequence, and he understood that what mattered most wasn't fame, money, or recognition. It was the choice to act with honesty, kindness, and care even when no one is watching. And in that quiet moment, Tom smiled, knowing that the visit from Edward Crane, the man whose life he had saved, was more than a meeting or a thank you. It was a reminder of life's mysterious ways, of the power of small actions, and of the journey that comes when one lives with integrity. For Tom, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a life transformed not by wealth or luck, but by the simple, enduring truth that doing good, no matter how small, can create ripples that change everything. And so, the mechanic from the small town, who once thought his days would always be ordinary, now stood at the center of a story that touched more lives than he had ever imagined, carrying forward the lesson that kindness, skill, and integrity always leave a mark. The silver pen gleamed on the desk in the soft evening light, a symbol of a life changed, a life of purpose embraced, and a visit that would never be forgotten.